Hi, my name is Fred Weller and I love movies. And this is really me wanting to talk about Superman, the movie 1978. And for me, this is some of the best film I've ever seen. I saw this as a kid in the theatres with my grandmother and my brother, and I loved this movie. It was one of my favourite movies to watch. So, sort of the stuff behind the camera, what was going on behind everything. I want to talk about that. I want to talk about who was involved. I want to talk about actors. I want to talk about the story. And I want to talk about what I love and find positive about this movie, because there's lots to love about it, like pretty much any movie. The first half of Superman is almost perfect. 1978, I was dumbfounded. I could not believe that they managed to make a movie that was so mythic. It was crazy just how good it was. Superman suffered from poor production planning, tried to make two movies at the same time, which didn't work or work well. But we got a wonderful film in the end. I'm amazed that 20 months of filming for Superman 1 and Superman 2 actually happened. It's crazy. It's rather inspiring, but it's absolutely crazy. There was no set budget. The final budget balloons to $55 million back in the day, which of course nowadays, and change it for inflation, it's going to be quite a bit more. But it grossed worldwide $300 million. And so it was profitable. It made money, even though it was an incredibly expensive movie to make. So $300 million is not something to sneeze at back in 1978. The Superman suit and the Superman character is hard to sell to any audience. And what was created was clearly out of place in the comic, because Superman always felt kind of out of place as soon as you saw him in his coloured garb and his outfit. But he also feels very out of place in a movie story as well. He is larger than life, but he's iconic. And they got one of the best directors to direct this movie, Richard Donner. So Richard Donner frequently battled with the producers, Alexander and Leah Selkirk. And I am amazed that there was so much of an argument over budget and creative control between Richard Donner and these two producers. It's sort of weird considering they paid Donner a lot of money. I think it was like $1 million to do both movies, and in the end he wound up really filming most of Superman 1 and I believe part of Superman 2. Donner wanted a serious tone, but the Selkids preferred camp, like the 1960s Batman show. Now, I watched the 1960s Batman TV show. That's not what I wanted from Superman. Frankly, that wasn't really what I wanted from Batman. But I will take whatever I can get back in the day. And because there was no set budget, there was no set time schedule for Donner, the director, to work by, because that wasn't put in place. That's what producers are supposed to make sure happen. It wasn't built like a normal film. It was built like a film made by amateurs, and the producers were amateurs in this area. So it's amazing that the movies even got made in the first place. So yeah, as I said, Donner filmed Superman, the movie, and part of Superman 2 simultaneously until conflicts halted Superman 2 mid-production. And really, despite the fact that Superman had already been released and was a hit, was doing very well at the theatre, Donner was fired before finishing Superman 2 and replaced by Richard Lester. Not a decision that I am very fond of. I don't think it was the right decision. And unfortunately, these sorts of things happen. But, at least we got Superman. Now, the producers, Alexander and Elia Selkirk, they pre-sold international distribution rights to fund the film because they didn't have enough money to fund it. They didn't think about budget. They didn't think about timing. So they just had this, where do you get all this money from? And they're wealthy, but they're not that wealthy. And now, pre-selling or pre-sold international distribution rights is really rare back in that day. And it's clearly because of financial struggles. They intended to make Superman and Superman 2 back-to-back to save money, which makes a lot of sense, but it's also a huge risk because you don't know what your audience and what your first movie is going to be like. So you really have to make sure that both movies, the first one and the second one, are going to do really well, and you also have to make them of a high quality. Otherwise, you won't make your money back. And a lot of movies have not made their money back, even if they were good. So, that happens. Now, their decision to pay Brando $3.7 million back in 1978 for 10 days of work is kind of nuts, but it happened. And Hackman made $2 million also for his work, and of course he was on set a lot more than that. It was criticised by a lot of people, and I think for good reason, but they also brought prestige to the film. I think Brando probably brought more prestige. Hackman, not quite as much. And we're going to talk about those two actors more as I go through this. But it's crazy to think. Like, movies were made for $3 million, $5 million back in 1978. That would be an entire movie in some cases. And that's how much they were paying actors. The screenplay is like every person under the sun has touched the script for Superman. So we've got Mario Puzo, we've got David Newman, we've got Leslie Newman, we've got Robert Burton, we've got Tom McKinwitz, I think it's something like that. Now, Mario Puzo was brought on because he is the author of Godfather, and he wrote the original script. But that original script was quite campy and humorous, but it was also 500 pages long. You can't make a movie with 500 pages. Just like, that's too much. Now, Tom, he was brought on board to rewrite Mario's script and give it a serious tone, create a serious feel to it, give it a mythic tone to it. And that's what Donner wanted. And he added the famous tagline, "You will believe a man will fly or can fly." And I think this is why the tone of this movie changes. You get this really impressive, serious, mythic tone right up from the very beginning, and it's wonderful, right up just before Superman or Clark Kent goes to New York. And then we get to New York, and it's like it's a completely different movie. It almost feels like maybe that was Mario's movie there, and Tom's movie was the first half. I don't know for sure, but it's kind of weird. Like, that movie's, the way that it sort of operates, it's like you're literally watching two separate movies sometimes. Now, the script originally had wild scenes like Superman versus Telly Savalas, who's Kojak. So Superman and Kojak, Clark Kent visiting Las Vegas. Clearly they were looking at doing very much the 1960s Batman sort of thing. I'm glad that didn't go into the movie as much as it did, because I wouldn't have been quite as happy, I suspect. And I still love the first half of this movie a lot. The editor, Stuart Bird. Now, Bird was brought in later in production after had already been edited, but his job was to tighten the film, fix pacing issues, and there were a lot of pacing issues. This film is quite a long movie too, so you do have to sort of trim things down. You can't stick, it's not like there didn't exist 6-hour movies, or movies that had two parts. That back in the day before 1978, that sort of thing did happen. You could have a 3-hour movie, you could have a 4-hour movie, but it wasn't necessarily a great idea. Now, one of the funny things that Stuart did while he was editing is he cut out a lot of Brando's footage to reduce the cost for the sequel. And because Brando had a percentage on the deal, and I think it was related to how much time he was on screen. So I think that's why they did that. It's very, very funny that something like that would actually take place. But these are the things that happen behind the scene. Now the music, John Williams. I think everybody knows John Williams and the Superman theme. Williams created probably the most iconic, heroic theme, and he did it in 2 weeks, of all things. Donna said that the first time he heard it, he knew the movie would work with that music. And I tend to agree. The music itself elevates everything you see on the screen. John had to fight, unfortunately, to keep his grand orchestral score because the producers, the Salkids, wanted pop songs, pop music. And I think, in their head, they're probably thinking this is probably better for that time. But one of the reasons for using an orchestral score is because it does tend to wind up being timeless. You don't need to worry about it aging in some way. And a lot of orchestral scores have survived, even if they are 50 years old or even older than that. Williams had just finished Star Wars and was hired. He was probably the hottest composer in Hollywood at the time. So our producers, the Salkids, they didn't spare anything. They wanted the best. They wanted the people everybody who could do the best job. And that's, saying something. So they obviously did some good things. Now the cinematography. Jeffrey Unsworth did the filming, formed the different scenes that we see in this film. Unsworth used diffused lighting to give the film its soft focus, because you notice how, with film you can go with a soft focus. Digital film, you don't get that. It's very crisp and tight. The lines are very distinct, but it gave it a soft feel. It looked timeless. It looked old. One of the things you notice, particularly that opening scene where we see the sort of black and white Daily Bugle, and they sort of, they explain a little bit. It's very romantic, and it's got an epic quality to it, which it still has today. That's one of the things you certainly do notice. Jeffrey wanted Krypton to look alien, but elegant, apparently, using as much reflective surfaces and crystal structures as possible. So I find this odd in that, the development and creation of the crystal structures. How is it that Jeffrey loved that idea? Clearly, using the reflective surfaces changes the way the whole film looks. It's sort of like looking at a dazzling diamond. When I think about the special effects in a film like this, we can't go past the fact that Derek Mendings and Zoran Perisic are involved, because they did a marvelous job. They used the new Zoptic front projection system. So the front projection system was invented by Persic to make Superman look like he was flying and make it convincing, which is wonderful. And it was really convincing to me. Marketing for the film said, as I mentioned before, you'll believe a man can fly, and that pushed them to invent different techniques never seen before. They had to do all sorts of different things to make it work. It's not just wire work, there's a lot of other things going on. In terms of taking off, landing, there were lots of different tricks that were used. And that's been done for years, even before Christopher Reeve was playing Superman. We can't sort of go past the fact, too, that Derek Mendings, famous for the Thunderbirds, that TV series, and there's a movie, of course, not the modern movie, the older movie, and then James Bond. Derek Mendings did a lot of the special effects on James Bond. He supervised the miniatures, everything, city destruction, the destruction of Krypton, anything that required miniatures, any of the special effects, Derek was certainly involved, and you can see it. Like, you can see he's trying different stuff. When I think about how I love certain characters, the characters that stand out for me are always the characters I'm going to talk about the most in Superman, the movie. And Marlon Brando as Jor-El was portrayed marvelously. He's not the only character, but, it's one of the first characters we see. So Brando, as I mentioned, earned $3.7 million, plus he had a percentage of the gross earnings, not a net, the gross earnings, for just doing 10 to 12 days worth of work. That's all he did. Now, Marlon didn't even memorize his lines. Now, he has a rationale like, I want to seem like I'm looking to think about what I'm going to do, that I don't have it already pre-planned in my head, that I'm searching for the words. I think this is probably more a product of he figured he didn't need to memorize things. It was only 12 days. It's only Superman, and I'm getting paid really well. And if Brando was a diva, for sure. He read his dialogue from cue cards that were hidden around the set all over the place. They even wrote his dialogue on the baby Kal-El's diaper. Like, the diaper actually had his lines written on that as well. Now, while Brando was polite, he didn't bond much with the cast. Famously, he didn't even remember Christopher Reeve, what his name was. Like, Christopher Reeve is Superman, playing the main character in the movie, doesn't know who Christopher is. And that's Brando. Brando suggested that Jor-El could be represented by a green suitcase or bargle. It's a green suitcase, okay, with a voiceover, and he would just voice over it. So that would mean he wouldn't even need to spend 12 days on a set. He could just go into a booth and record everything, voice only, nothing else. So it's kind of nuts. And I mean, geez, is he really pushing to do as little work as possible to get that $3.7 million plus the percentage? I don't think he actually ever thought that would make any money. I don't think he actually believed that there would be, some profit at the end for him, but there definitely was. And that was just so he could avoid appearing on screen. I mean, it's really strange how people operate. Donna had to talk Brando out of the idea of, no, we cannot replace you with a suitcase, and no, you cannot just do a voiceover. You have to be on screen. The whole point of getting people to come was to see your face in the film, and at the very beginning. So Brando later sued the producers for sharing for a share of the Superman 2 film, the profits that were made, and he won millions because of that deal he made. It's very, very strange how all this works, but Jor-El is one of the most standout characters in Superman. Then we have Terrence Stamp as General Zod, and he made his mark when he threatened Jor-El's children with an eerie speech. Like, that speech is something that stands out, and a lot of people still remember it to this day. It set up Terrence Stamp as being a real threat, and we don't get that, obviously, in this movie. It comes out later on, but I still think that he did a pretty good job. And it's not like, the Phantom Zone scene has 3 characters, and only one of them speaks. The rest just stand there. That's it. Until, of course, they are having to film the second movie. We can't, of course, go past anybody like Christopher Reeve is an amazing actor who did a great job as Superman. And let's get real, like, Superman hadn't been on the big screen. This was the first time. He'd been on the small screen like television, but he hadn't really been on the big screen. I was not personally keen on his adult Clark Kent. That bumbling man in the suit was really frustrating to watch at times, because reading the comic books, even watching the older TV series, the influence was that he was a mild-mannered reporter. He wasn't a bumbling idiot. And that kind of, they're trying to differentiate Superman, Reeve playing Superman, and Reeve playing Clark Kent. I get it. I see what Reeve is trying to do. Reeve was a complete unknown before landing Superman, and the studios initially wanted big stars like Robert Redford, Paul Newman, Burt Reynolds. I don't know about Burt Reynolds, even Sylvester Stallone. But Richard Donner pushed for an unknown face, and I think that is the right decision, and why, as you see Superman being played by new actors, it probably should always be somebody that you don't identify as being a particular persona. So an unknown is probably a smart idea. When Reeves was cast, he was very thin, around 170 pounds. The producers wanted to use a muscle suit, but Reeves refused the muscle suit. Instead, he trained for months with David Prowse, the actor who plays physically Darth Vader. Now, David Prowse is a bodybuilder, and he bulked up Reeves to 212 pounds. So he put on a lot of extra muscle, in fact, so much that it kind of stretches that suit. Reeves insisted on doing as much of the wire work as he possibly could so that it looked like it was him doing it, rather than having somebody stand in. Now, the zootropic system allowed him to fly realistically, but it was really physically demanding, and he often hung in a harness for hours, like most people do if you have to do any kind of flying. Reeves studied Cary Grant's comedy style for Clark Kent, which is probably why Clark Kent comes across as the way he does. And he worked with acting coaches to create a really clear difference between Superman and Clark. That's one of the things I think he was worried about, making sure they were distinctive. He said the key was posture and voice tone, and you can see that. Even just the changing the voice, changing the posture, taking off the glasses made all the difference. On set, Reeves liked to lighten the mood by joking while in costume. And the crew members often would say he really looked like Superman until he started cracking jokes. And then you knew that it wasn't Superman anymore. One of the great things, though, is Reeves had an understanding of flight, and flying. And so when he actually flies as Superman in this film, he moves his body in a way that makes sense in terms of if your body was able to physically fly. He does his very best to make it very convincing, which is why it looks so good and why you're so convinced he is Superman, right? Now, Margaret Kinder as Lois Lane. Not my favourite actress. Over 200 actresses tested for the role of Lois. Actresses like Stockard Channing, Leslie Ann Warren were considered, but Kinder's chemistry with Reeve in the tests and the screen tests sort of sealed her as being the person to play that role. And I can kind of understand that. Donna wanted Lois to be strong but quirky, and Kinder really nailed that aspect of her for sure. She improvised some of her dialogue to make Lois feel like spontaneous and sort of a little bit harebrained, actually, in many cases. During the famous flying scene with Superman takes Lois across Metropolis, Kinder was terrified of the wires snapping. And, if you look back at how you would fly Superman with George Reeves back in the TV series, wires did snap. They had to use a completely different system because it was not safe. But Donna had to reassure Kinder all the time, constantly, that it was safe to be hanging from the wires. So, yeah, and I can understand that fear. When you think about This is new stuff. They're inventing new technology. They're having to get people to fly. They're using old technology, but there's always going to be problems, right? Now, famously, there is this voiceover poem in a flying scene that was recorded last minute because Donna felt that the scene needed more emotion. This is where Superman takes Lois for a little test flight over Metropolis, right? And it's not my favourite scene. And in fact, it's one of the scenes where I really didn't like it. But Kinder admitted herself that she thought it sounded silly, but she delivered it as sincerely as she possibly could, since that was the job. So yeah, I am of the opinion that Donna probably shouldn't have put that in there because it didn't feel right at all. Kinder often joked on set and loved teasing Reeve, in particular, Christopher Reeve, about his serious approach to the role, and he was quite serious. The Lois Lane character is such an odd character in this film. Like when I think about the comic book and I think about the TV show, and Lois was, quite a good character. I mean, it's a meaty character, and she's not one-dimensional. But Lois, as portrayed in this film as a character, is such a self-absorbed, shallow woman in the story. I could really, myself, never understand why Clark Kent or Superman liked her at all. I could not understand at all what was going on. It was really hard for me to keep that in my head. But, I think one of the things you notice is Lois Lane sort of comes into her groove later on after the first Superman movie. You start to see Lois is better as a person, not quite as just unpleasant to be around, frankly. Mellowed it down, made it a lot better. Gene Hackman makes a great Lex Luthor most of the time, in my opinion, except for hiring Otis and setting off a fault line for land profit. It's a really strange idea. I mean, I just when you think about the story and what he's trying to do, it's very comical. Now, Hackman was skeptical about playing a comic book villain, but signed on because the paycheck was really big, and Donna pitched the story as being something that he wanted to be in. So he jumped on board. Now, Hackman wouldn't go bald, so Donna compromised by giving Luthor a series of wigs that he could change in and out of. And Gene also initially refused to shave his mustache until Donna said he would shave his mustache off. And he didn't actually have a mustache. He ripped off a fake mustache in front of Hackman. And that was like Hackman had realized he had been tricked, but he obliged and he cut off the mustache. Hackman added a lot of personality to Luthor, giving him a sly sense of humor and an over-the-top arrogance, which actually fits very much with Lex Luthor. The sly sense of humor is actually, I wouldn't say that it's unwelcome. I think it's just right. Hackman and Betty, who played, Warren Beatty, who played Otis, became really good friends during filming, which helped with their, comedic timing and stuff like that. Something I'm not hugely fond of is having the interaction between Otis and Lex Luthor myself. It's though the least favourite parts of the film for me, but I'm glad they had a good friendship out of it. Valerie Perrine as Eve Teschmacher. She's basically the voice of reason. I liked her, even if physically she's supposed to represent or be presented as a bimbo, which she's not. She just isn't. Perrine was a really bold choice for a superhero film and brought a lot of sensuality to the role, obviously. And had a thing for Teschmacher back in the day as a kid. Teschmacher's famous scene rescuing Superman brought a lot of, the drowning scene was really quite controversial because, as Teschmacher is saving Superman who's drowning in this pool, it required Superman to put aside Lois's safety. Like, Lois's life is at stake here. And it added drama, and it was a difficult choice for Superman. And it's quite smart because, if you want to ramp things up and really make it seem like there is a chance that she will die, and Lois Lane does die in this film, that'll do it, right? That puts the stakes there. There's something going on. But I don't think anybody ever realised that Lois Lane might actually die in the Superman film. Never ever occurred to me, I know that. So Ned Beatty as Otis was really perceived as the needed comic relief. I don't think it needed it at all. Otis was created to give Luthor a bumbling sidekick. I don't think that Luthor would have had a bumbling sidekick. I think Luthor would probably have should have hired somebody who was capable and competent, just as smart as he is. But in this film, we don't get that. Betty loved playing the role. Ned was very happy to play the role, played it like a clueless henchman, which of course we see on screen. Many of Otis's funniest moments, although I wouldn't say they are that funny, but there's definitely stuff in there that is funny. Were improvised on the set. Like they weren't planned out that well, they were just improvised. Now, Jackie Cooper as Perry White was so manic as Perry White. It was clear this guy was on the edge of burnout, frankly. Cooper, who was a former child star, brought old Hollywood energy to the role, giving Perry White a fast-talking, old-school newspaper editor feel. And like Jackie filmed almost all of his scenes in just a couple of weeks because of the scheduling constraints that were in place. And so that's why it was done that way. I don't like to talk a lot about the plot of a movie because I know most of you, if you're here, you're listening to this because you've already seen the movie. Do I need to explain the plot to you? So I guess I'm going to just tell you what my feelings are about everything that I saw on screen in terms of the plot and what takes place. I think that's probably the smart way. So yeah, here we go. So the plot is an origin story. And I think everybody seems to assume that if you're doing a Superman movie, you have to do the origin story every time you start again with a new actor. I don't think you do. I'm very pleased to see that that's not always the case, but this movie does that. We've never seen Superman on the big screen, so this is the right time to do the origin story. The planet Krypton, being made of crystal, alien, it's like an alien feast. It's crazy the way it looked. It was really unexpected. I was not expecting anything like that. It was wonderfully epic on the screen, and it lasts in my mind. And it's been transferred over to other media and other films over the years. People keep duplicating that sort of design look. So I always loved it. Krypton, the planet collapsing and exploding, is still terrifying to this day. You lose perspective as you're going upside down, sideways, right way up. There doesn't feel like there's anything to grab onto. It's like a nightmare. When you would dream, you have a nightmare, and you might be flying or you fall, and you fall and you're terrified. You haven't hit the ground yet, but you're still falling, and you're waiting for it to happen. You know it's going to happen. It always brings me back to those feelings as a kid. I don't have that sort of stuff nowadays, thank God. But yeah, it still terrifies me. Even when I watch it today, it reminds me of that. The trial of Zord and his two cronies being sent to the Phantom Zone was nothing. It was nothing like, I'd never seen anything like it before. It was really bleak. It showed the harder side of the Krypton civilization, maybe sort of foreshadowing the next movie, and which it does, of course. We don't know that at the time because we didn't, like when we saw Superman, we didn't realize there was Superman 2 coming. I had no idea as a kid that there was another one on its way. So yeah, when I saw this, I didn't realize that we were going to come back to these three individuals. This superhero film took the subject matter really seriously in the first half of the story. And I wanted more of that. I always wanted more of that. I was hoping that we'd get more of that. Clark Kent always looked goofy running beside the train. You know, as a kid, I haven't said very much about the actor who played young Clark Kent as a teenager, but he was so good. He was brilliant. One of my favourite performances in the movie, and for the life of me, I can't even remember his name. I thought it was Lance, but yeah, maybe I'm wrong. But anyway. But every time you see Clark Kent running right beside the train, it's great. It still impresses me today. Like, you can see the dust cloud. It looks really convincing. I always think back to, an old TV series called The $6 Million Man, and how they showed initially how he would run, where they would just speed up the bottom half of his body. And I think they would shoot it with two cameras, top half, bottom half, put them together so that it worked. Because otherwise you wind up speeding up everything that's happening above as well, not just below. And what you want to do is you just want the feet to be going fast, not everything else. And of course, the $6 Million Man went to slow motion, which of course didn't make any sense whatsoever, but we got it anyway. But the first depictions, I always wanted that to be the way that Clark ran beside the train. But again, they were trying new things. They'd never done this sort of stuff before. And you learn and you try and you improve. Now, Jonathan Kent dying of a heart attack made the important point, I think, that Superman can't fix every problem. It's really abundantly clear. Or can he? Because apparently later on he's going to turn back time. He doesn't spin the world around. He's turning back time. That's the depiction we get later on. We'll get to that. So yeah, apparently he could fix everything if he really wanted to. But yeah, I mean, I think that sold me more on what lies at the heart of Superman, is the fact that he knows he's got these special powers, but there's limitations. And I think that's a good thing. I think we need to have limitations in a story about a individual who flies, has heat vision, X-ray vision, is super strong, and pretty much impervious to pain or injury, except for the likes of kryptonite. Now, I remember the journey going north to, you got that opening scene with the cornfields or the fields, and he's talking to his mum and saying that I have to leave. It was really awe-inspiring, and I didn't expect it would go further. It always gives me goosebumps every time I watch that scene. And then you get to the making of the Fortress of Solitude, where he throws the green crystal. It was, again, awe-inspiring, magical. It was, growing a crystal structure from a single crystal is such a creative idea, and obviously clearly advanced technology, but there's a reason why they keep duplicating that. It's because it's such a great idea. The architecture of the Fortress of Solitude, it looks alien, it's chaotic, and it's really original, certainly back then. Superman flying is so convincing most of the time, and it still looks great today. Like, I am always impressed at just how well Superman flies through the scenes. There's just a couple of things that you can pick out and you think, oh, okay, that's probably something where they stuck somebody on wires. But a lot of the time, I'm really convinced. When Clark Kent meets Lois Lane, it becomes campy, a goofy sort of comic book story, and probably because there were too many people involved who could not think of Superman any other way. And at the top, I mean, I think a lot of the audience probably still considered, comic book heroes to be sort of campy, silly, comic-y sort of stuff, comical in nature. Obviously, the producers thought that as well, which is why they leaned into that so much. But you see that tone change right there. And that tonal change is I think for me, the weakest part of the film when it happens. But within the second half of the film, we get some gems. We get the crashed helicopter and Superman saving Lois Lane as she's about to fall out is awesome. And catching her and catching the helicopter. Plenty of tension in that scene. I don't feel that tension because I know what's going to happen now, but back in the day, I was convinced, for sure. And it took a while I've watched Superman, the movie, so many times. I've watched Superman 1978 more times than I can count. There's another scene where Superman reveals his weaknesses to Lois, who tells the entire world in an article in a newspaper. It's rather frustrating. I don't find that very logical, but it does show that Superman sees the good in everyone and has no desire to keep secrets from people, something that he probably should be doing. But no, this is Superman. He sees the best in everybody, and he wants them to know exactly who he is and what he's about. The flying scene with Lois Lane and Superman, I've said it before, I'm not going to say it again. Okay? I have said as much as I want to say about that scene. Everything leading up to that was really good. Although it's strange to see a reporter on a balcony in the likes of Metropolis, where you're pretty sure that she's like a reporter. How could she possibly afford to live in a space like that? Maybe she rented or hired no, I don't know. Maybe she rented or hired it. I don't know. Well, that doesn't make any sense. It still doesn't make any sense. Yeah, it lost me a lot. There's another thing that crops up in this film which is really strange, and that's Lex Luthor's understanding of Superman. Like, he reads the article like everybody else, but in the article, does the article state that Superman is vulnerable and can be killed by kryptonite? Does it say that? I don't remember that. Maybe that was cut out of the final cut of the film. But how is it that Superman knows that he can be killed by kryptonite? That made no sense to me. So if Superman doesn't know, then how does Lex Luthor know? Because even Superman or Clark doesn't know. Like, it's one of those things, like, there's something that they've obviously cut out that was probably in the movie that would help tie that together to make that feel like it made sense. And it's again, I still don't know how Superman or Clark could possibly know that he is, can be hurt by kryptonite. But anyway, because when he comes across it, does he know? It's really hard. Yeah. When Superman has to stop Lex Luthor's crazy plans, which are utterly nuts, the story becomes awesome. Like, we go into full throttle, what we were all looking for. We had a lot of Clark Kent, and now we're going to get a lot of Superman. There's lots of amazing scenes with Superman saving people, such as sealing that fault line, which I still remember, like, what the heck is he up to? But later on, as you get older, you realise. Stopping the dam flood washing away a town was great. Catching Jimmy when he falls from the dam, also a great scene. Stopping that bus full of kids falling was awesome. Flying in and pushing the rail track back into place so that the train doesn't derail. There's lots of really awesome stuff. Like, and of course we can't forget the fact that he got a cat out of a tree. Later on, I guess you've got to you've got to save an animal because animals are good, right? Lex pushing Superman into a swimming pool with a kryptonite necklace doesn't seem like an effective method to kill somebody who is super powerful like Superman when you are a really smart villain. This seems like the most ineffective method to be doing it. I could never understand why it was done this way. It's almost sadistic and like, I want him to die slowly. That whole scene is really strange. I remember sitting beside my brother, but particularly my grandmother. I was sitting with my grandmother, and she could never understand why wouldn't Superman just take the kryptonite necklace off? Because even Tessmacher was able to lift it off, and she's not Superman, and throw it a very good distance. Does it make him weaker than Tessmacher? Weaker than Eve? And she said, all he's got to do is just drop to the bottom of the pool, hold his breath, and it will come off. He'll be able to get it off because you drop down. The weight I'm sure the chain is heavy, but it can't be that heavy that you can't slip underneath it. How can't you not slip underneath that thing? It's one of those things about that movie that was always very peculiar, and it's still to this very day that I keep remembering what my grandmother said about that scene. Superman turning back time, because Lois Lane winds up perishing. She gets caught in the earthquake in a crack, and she suffocates, and he is not able to get there in time. So Superman turns back time to save Lois Lane's life. And it creates problems for future movies, because now you're questioning, if anything goes wrong, why can't he just turn back time again? Even though, for me, I think when I saw this and they killed Lois Lane in the film, and I'm like, you've got to be kidding. I don't believe they're going to kill Superman. I don't really, I'm thinking they might kill, other characters, but they're not going to kill Lois Lane. Because Lois Lane and Superman, you can't have Superman and not have Lois Lane. They go together. So how could you not have them? And then she dies. And so, of course, they've got to bring her back. So even though the scene was, caused problems, I think as a kid it was amazing at the time, and I loved it. And it also showed that, Superman was willing to turn back time for only one thing. He never did it for anything else, but for the woman that he loved, he would do it for that. So there are no lengths that he would not go to for Lois. I like that idea. Now, I guess my summary for Superman 1978 is, I still love the movie. I still watch it. Even though some of the characters aren't really for me, even though I can see some of the warts, I still love, in general, there's so much that's great about this film, and it's still so entertaining. I'm still keen to see different takes on Superman, and we've gotten over the years many different takes, many different ways of doing Superman, and I've enjoyed or loved most of them. And I want to see something else done. And I'm really looking forward to the new Superman movie, which I haven't actually seen yet. And I loved The Man of Steel. I really enjoyed that film. That was wonderful. So yeah, keep doing different things. It's always a good thing. And I don't know if this is the sort of thing that people want to listen to, but I want to talk about the stuff that I love and like about movies, and that's what I'm going to focus on. So I don't know what I'm going to talk about next, but that was Superman 1978. I can't believe I was 7 years old when this movie came out. I am now 54. It's crazy, isn't it? So, till next time. If there is a next time. I don't know if there will. We'll see.